Let's talk about hollow earth and the hollow earth theory. What is it? Is there anything to it? What can we conclude about it? So there's different levels to trying to inquire into our reality and our world and beyond our world, beyond our sense perceptions, and so forth. And I think you can classify it into two general broad classes, if you want. One is you've got a body of information where people are basically repeating the same conspiracy theories and recycling claims, quotes, cause and effect, narratives that are basically just being moved from one source to another, and people are just repackaging the information. Then there's another class of actual research and actual inquiry and study into these questions of, could something really exist? Are there secret bodies of information about our world that's been held from us? And so we have to always keep that in mind with any of these subjects, and hollow earth is no exception. What do we mean by hollow earth? Well, first, I'm not a huge fan of the term because it sounds like flat earth. And flat earth, now granted, I haven't gone down a huge rabbit hole with the flat earth and definitively disproving it. However, in my research, I have come to the conclusion that there is nothing substantial to the flat earth model, and in my research that is thoroughly disproven by the evidence that we have available to us, and I don't find that theory plausible. And in fact, what I do think, especially after watching the popular documentary about flat earth theory, is I think it was more of a social phenomena than anything. And there's even a possibility that the flat earth theory was a deliberate psychological operation, perhaps by a intelligence agency or faction thereof, to basically make conspiracy theories look ridiculous and be able to label it, oh, you're a flat earther, one of those, which would make sense to me because there are real conspiracies. That is just a fact. And it's been a clever ploy of this catch-all phrase, conspiracy theorist, conspiracy theory, that's just used as a mechanism to just immediately discredit somebody that has a alternative theory or is asking questions in a critical way. We have hard evidence. I could go at length of all of the conspiracies that have become true, gone from conspiracy theory to conspiracy fact. So let's get over that, number one. Let's realize we are living in a world where conspiracies are a regular part of it. So, now hollow earth. Okay, what do we mean by hollow earth? Now, another term you can call it is inner earth, which sounds, I like the term better because it sounds a little more removed from flat earth theory. Hollow earth theory in its essence is suggesting that on the interior of our planet Earth, there are spaces that are habitable by living beings. And in fact, they are. And they have water, and they have other elements and vegetation and nature that allows them to have civilization on the interior of the Earth. That's the core of what it's saying. And in most cases, that these civilizations may have actually gone into the interior of the planet many, many thousands of years ago, and may be actually far advanced from humans. And in fact, many of the UFO sightings that have occurred in larger number since the 1940s to today, a good percentage of them, may actually be coming from inside the interior of the planet. Now, this theory, on paper, to the average person, would seem highly far-fetched, wildly bizarre, and unbelievable, and something that most would label as the thoughts of someone not sane. But is it really that crazy? Is it really that crazy to think that if there are beings from other planets or other dimensions that we don't even perceive that have a presence on Earth, which we're coming upon that being disclosed to some degree to the American public and the world, hopefully? Is it that crazy to think that there could be such civilizations who have gone underground? Especially when you consider things like the ocean, and you consider that only 50% of the world's oceans have been mapped undersea. And something in the neighborhood of well above 50%, we know nothing about the deep ocean. And I may be misquoting, but I think it's something like 90% has not been explored, the deep ocean. You couple that with the amount of UFOs being sighted in the ocean, USOs underwater, and rumors, claims about bases deep undersea. And you couple that with the idea that the theory that some scientists and even NASA scientists have speculated that, well, the oceans would be a good place because of the constant temperature and so forth for interstellar travel to be. So when we consider all that, then we start to see, okay, the idea of advanced civilizations living underground is not as lunatic as it might first seem. But now with Hollow Earth and the Inner Earth theory, we are talking about something that becomes a little bit different. That is the theory at its core, what I've stated. Now, but the narrative and the lore that has built around Hollow Earth is a little bit different and is involving certain places in the world where there are actually tunnels, passageways that lead into this greater cavity on the other side of the Earth's crust, where there are entire civilizations. And of course that there are openings at the polar regions that lead into this inner Earth. Now, the funny thing about the Hollow Earth theory, which has been covered at length by some major YouTube channels, that even YouTube channels that cover conspiracy theories but ultimately usually debunk them, whether they do that substantially or not varies. But what the consensus is on the Hollow Earth theory and all the details about this story is that it has not yet been disproven conclusively as total nonsense or hearsay or just myth and legend. And of course, at the crux of this whole part of the inner Earth, Hollow Earth theory and the polar openings relates to Admiral Richard Byrd. Now, people on big podcasts who are starting to dabble in these realms, like you see Sam Tripoli on the Joe Rogan podcast bringing it up, and Rogan never heard of it. Then you see people recycling that information. You see channels like Robert Sepper, and you even see other people speaking about it, like the Campaganian podcast. And people haven't really looked into it, and people misquote things. For example, here's the basic thing, right? Here's the basic story about Admiral Byrd. And mind you, let's talk about the source of where this whole Hollow Earth theory, a lot of it really comes from. is from a 1965, I believe, give or take a year or two there, book by someone named Dr. Raymond Bernard. Okay, he published this book in the 60s called The Hollow Earth. And he does a good job, actually, of summarizing the story and the theory and the information about it. And actually, if you're really interested in this topic, I would say this is a great place to start, is to read this as your baseline and then start to venture out from there. Now, who was Dr. Raymond Bernard? When I read this book, when I knew nothing about this topic, and he says that it implies he's an NYU professor, PhD, and so when I read this, it was just fascinating to me. And of course, that began my journey of actually studying this topic seriously and seeing if there's anything to it. And, for example, on the Y-Files channel, which has covered the Inner Earth and Admiral Byrd multiple times, they discredit Raymond Bernard as a hoaxer or a fraud, but that's inaccurate because he just used the pen name Raymond Bernard, but it was somebody named Walter Siegmeister. And he was actually an NYU PhD. He was an educator. He did his PhD about the Rudolf Steiner teaching method that would become the Waldorf School, and he was, an actual intellectual from a family that had some standing. So he wasn't just any old quack writing this book. And of course, the details in the book, certainly there's a lot of information, and we don't know the degree of the substantiality of a lot of it. But it does provide a roadmap, and it does seem to be the source of the Admiral Byrd legends. Now, Admiral Byrd and all of that is a topic for a whole presentation. And there's certainly some mystery surrounding what happened. But here's the basic things that you need to know. Admiral Byrd was the first American to fly over the North Pole, and that was in 1926 or 27. Now, there's been disputes over if was he the first human to fly over the North Pole. There was other people that claimed it. Some people even dispute if he even went over the pole. But the legend in Hollow Earth is that Byrd and his co-pilot, Floyd Bennett, in that 26-27 flight, that they actually encountered something bizarre. And they actually seemed to have started to go into some type of opening at the North Pole. And they turned back. And apparently his co-pilot, Floyd Bennett, was actually a follower or a researcher into the Hollow Earth theory, which goes back before the 20s. Now, this topic is so complex, so forgive me, but it goes back further. It actually begins in a large way with Edmund Halley, who was the astronomer scientist, widely notable, who was credited with Halley's Comet. I'm sure you've heard of it. And he had theorized that there were open cavities in the Earth's interior. And apparently, that's the rumor, is that Floyd Bennett, Byrd's co-pilot, was into that kind of stuff, and they saw something up there. And the other allegation is that they then went the following year again into the North Pole in a top-secret flight commissioned by the Navy. And they went up to North Pole again, and that time they took photographs and did a full report. And allegedly, this information is still classified, top secret, and it actually showed apparently that some signs of a habitable region on the interior of the Earth. So, and that has been confirmed, but this is allegations out there in the literature. Now we go to 1947, 46, 47. And this is where in the conspiracy world you'll see Operation Highjump will be brought up. And again, Admiral Byrd. Now this is where people get into the pattern of just recycling lore instead of doing some more of the research. So Operation Highjump was a massive military campaign to go to Antarctica. And this was right after, a year after World War II ended. And yes, there were rumors that a group of the Nazis had went to Antarctica and set up a secret base there. Now, there's no conclusive proof that happened. I mean, we know for sure that the Nazis did go to Antarctica in 1939. That's a fact. And then there are allegations of further missions and expeditions. And even, for example, in this, which came out in the early 1950s, you have stories like this about Hitler establishing a base in Antarctica. And so, that is out there, and it certainly is possible when we think about that the Germans were definitely there. Some have claimed to debunk this. However, if you really read the debunkings, it does not do it conclusively. So, but this is crucial to the whole theory, because then the story goes that U.S. intelligence found out that was happening or possibly happening, and that's why in 46, 47 they sent this massive military expedition to Antarctica to look for this Nazi base and potentially do something about it. Now, this is where the conspiracy world and people recycling information misses some of the important details, because they'll say, oh, it was supposed to be scientific and they made this huge armada. But that's actually not true. If you look at the actual operational documents of Highjump, it was also meant to test military equipment in Antarctica in the cold regions. And so that could be a prosaic explanation of why they would send such a huge force there. But even that is questioned, and even in news articles at the same time, the journalists at the time were questioning, and they were basically publishing opinions saying, we don't think they're telling us the truth of why they're really going there. Why would you send such huge expedition just to test military equipment there? And then there's also some misconceptions of it was supposed to be 6 months, but then they turned back early after like a few weeks. That's also not true. Part of the expedition departed earlier than expected, but only by a matter of weeks, something like 3 to 6 weeks. And that's from my research looking into the primary sources of what's available, at least on what the official story is. Now, there are some unanswered questions. There is a mystery there, and it's hard to really pin it down. But if you look, then this is the thing that in the Hollow Earth theory and the Operation Highjump where people get this part wrong. And this is what hooks a lot of people in. Because if you're an open-minded, critical thinking person and you see this piece of information, it's got to be a question that's got to be answered. And that is in this interview with Admiral Byrd and a Chilean newspaper. So most reports, stories, videos out there will say that, yes, Admiral Byrd did an interview on their way back after aborting the mission early. And he gave an interview saying the United States needs to be prepared for an enemy with vehicles that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Now, if any rational person hears that, this Navy admiral said that obviously demands further investigation. I mean, that's just a crazy thing to say. But he didn't say that, as far as we know from any evidence that exists on that. And the interview, when you actually dive deeper, the interview he gave was to someone named Lee Van Atta, who was actually an American reporter. But I believe that it was released into the Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio. And you can actually get the original translation there. Byrd doesn't say that, but he does make an interesting statement that demands further investigation. Admiral Byrd says that the biggest finding from the whole mission were the security implications, the implications for national security, right? Now, by all records, in his National Geographic article, which he wrote a whole long report for National Geographic, plus the other official documentation, there's nothing special there. And in fact, even on Byrd's National Geographic article, he said there's nothing of interest there. There's no reason he can argue for the United States having any economic interest there, and so forth. But in the El Mercurio interview, he says the biggest finding was as it relates to national security. And he does say, quote, "I don't want to frighten or worry anybody, but the reality is that, you know, the world's getting smaller and there may be attacks from the poles." You know, he does say that. He doesn't say vehicles that could fly at incredible speeds from pole to pole, but you can go read the comment. And in fact, I've broken it down with hopefully future papers and a video that I'll put out. But what he says definitely doesn't add up, and it makes you say, what did he find down there? And that's a very, very highly valid question. Does it mean that he found, well, the official rumored story is that they did find part, or at least went near the Nazi base, and that the Nazis had UFOs, they had flying saucers, and they saw them, and they shot down at least one of the U.S. Navy planes, and that's why Byrd was making those statements, and that's why they went back, and that's why that was like a shell shock. I mean, now on the one hand, of course it sounds fantastical to us who have been indoctrinated in our official history. But on the other hand, imagine something like that really happened, and the Nazi, or this group, this faction of the Nazis, actually, now we know that the Nazi scientists were way ahead of the rest of the world as far as we know it. I mean, that's who the U.S. officially pardoned and recruited into the military and science research apparatus in the United States, Operation Paperclip. This is a documented fact now. Werner von Braun led our rocket program. I mean, they were highly advanced. And you have such as Hermann Oberth making statements that allude to, you know, some obscurity of what was really going on. And the German and Nazi involvement in the occult and in believing they had contacted beings and races that were, you know, non-human. So, of course, you know, that's where it gets into tricky waters there, but that exists, right? And them believing that there may have been entrances to an inner world at the poles, you know, some of that, there's some substance to that in the background. Imagine that the U.S. Navy goes there in 46, 47, and they actually see one of these flying saucers and they actually shoot one of their planes down. I mean, that would be wild. It would, of course, be the most top secret information, and it might explain why Byrd would make those comments. It might explain the mysterious aftermath of Byrd's career and his silence and so forth. But it also could be creative lore. But the point is that definitely there's strong validity to asking the question of, did he see something down there? Because those comments are very suggestive in the interview. So that's kind of as far as a lot of the conspiracy coverage will go on that issue. Misquoting the different elements of it, especially the Byrd quote, And then there's the Admiral Byrd Diary, which also is a very strange occurrence, where this book came out in the 2000s, like the early, maybe a little before 2010, maybe around there. This book came out, The Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd, which supposedly someone got from a relative, and it told this kind of fantastical story of when Byrd went into the hollow earth in his South Pole or North Pole flight, how these beings made his craft land and told him, don't use nuclear weapons and this and that. And that's a whole conundrum in itself, because on most of the conspiracy coverage on this is that was a fake, and that even that Raymond Bernard probably wrote it. Now, I would contest with that conclusion that's been made, because that book, The Top Secret Diaries of Admiral Byrd, as far as my research shows, was not published until well after Bernard was dead. Raymond Bernard died, I believe, in the late 60s. He wasn't around to write those fake diaries. So if you I've tried to trace down where those secret diary of Admiral Byrd really came from, because was there any substance to it? And it's very obscure. I haven't been able to get a response from the publisher, who's apparently the first publisher of the book. It would be nice to find out exactly where and why, how that book came to be. My own take on it is that it's not authentic, but it might not be that simple as just a hoax. It could be a deliberate disinformation, so that the whole Admiral Byrd Antarctica mystery conspiracy theory gets discredited, right? Because once you have this piece of information, it's like, oh, this is all bizarre. Or there might actually be some truth to it. Maybe Byrd really did see something bizarre and wrote about it, or even had an encounter with something beyond our own human civilization. I mean, it's possible. You can't rule it out. And maybe he wrote about it, and maybe part of it was true, and then they mixed it with the fantastical stuff, which apparently was found to be like almost the same as one of the movie or show scripts of the 50s or 60s. And so that's a whole mystery in itself. It doesn't really add much to this theory. But we do know that there's some intrigue and there's some mystery surrounding it. If you go back to, could it be possible that there could be such a civilization living inside the earth? Well, we can consider that we have the amount that we've actually drilled down and verified what's there is insanely small in terms of how much space is there. It's wild. We've looked and seen and verified what's out in outer space more than we have into our own inside of our planet. There have been anomalies found in recent years. There are a lot of unanswered questions. There are stories about things going on in Antarctica, secrecy, no flyover zones, claims by very few, but still they're there, whistleblowers of strange things going on underground in Antarctica. Thousands of years ago, we have the myths of many different places speaking of an underground civilization, speaking of coming from underground, speaking of going to the underground after death and whatnot. And our model of what's on the inside of our planet, and the one that we're all taught and indoctrinated with in school, it's theoretical. We're led to believe that we know that that's what the inside of the earth looks like. But that's just not true. Let's be fair. That's theory. It's based on readings of seismographic readings from seismometers that detect waves going on. And then it's inferred from that data what's the makeup of the interior of the planet, and that's changing, and it's all theoretical. We can't actually see what's down there. It's all theorized. So it's possible. You can't say it's wild science fiction just because we've never conceived that could actually be a physical reality. So in that sense, I think that the inner earth, hollow earth theory is worth investigating. I think there's enough collective smoke around it that there could be some kind of a fire there. And what that is, we don't know. And, you have so many elements coming in. You have other books. You have the science fiction and Hollywood aspect of it. For example, Jules Verne, who was tied to occult secret societies. And some speculate that maybe knowledge of an actual presence in the inner earth is part of the secret knowledge that goes back and has been preserved in the secret societies, and only the few come to know of that information. And maybe Jules Verne was channeling some of that. Verne also was into Captain Sims. There's a lot to this. This is what I mean. I've left out the Captain Sims. He was a general or a major. Well, he was a captain of the army in the post-Civil War era in the United States, and he was high reputation, and he believed, because there was another author, Marshall Gardner, and others who kind of championed around Halley's original hollow earth theory and others that developed, and Sims wanted to send an expedition to go look for an opening into an interior earth. And he lobbied Congress, and he petitioned Congress to do this. And this is all documented. Apparently, he never got the funding. There have been allegations in the literature, though, that he did there was a secret mission that ended up going and kind of seeing that there was something bizarre going on there. So, yeah, I think that there's enough smoke to investigate this. And certainly it's one of the unexplored frontiers, really. I mean, for us, we don't know what's all the way down there. Just think about that for a minute. How little we've drilled down and looked versus what's underneath our feet. And in the oceans and underneath the oceans. We think about everything out there, but hey, at the same time, we don't even know what's under our feet. And what would be the implication of this? Well, it could be equally as important as establishing contact or understanding with an outer world of outer space civilizations, and potentially could even be more important if such an inner Earth civilization exists. Perhaps they've been here longer. Perhaps they know of our history and know of the Earth's history and the Earth's place in the greater cosmic arena. So, and obviously there would be a direct relationship there too, and especially if they had advanced technology and so forth. So it may even be more valuable to uncover the truth about the inner Earth, or just prove it wrong, so that we can collectively, as a collective group of truthers, seekers of truth, whatever you want to call it, detectives trying to get to the bottom of, okay, what else could be known about this reality that's been kept secret from the general public? And I think there's a lot. And we know this. We've seen things come out. And we're on the precipice of something with the UFO and David Grush and all that really getting us past a certain point. So I think it's worth thinking about. So worth having this conversation. Is there something going on in the interior? Is there something to the polar mysteries, the Byrd expeditions and the rumors and the legends and all of this? On a final note, Admiral Byrd's son died in very mysterious circumstances. And I know there's an extra random detail, but I'm telling you, this subject, there's so much to it that makes you think, something's just not fully adding up with the official dismissal of nothing to see here. So there's an introduction to the hollow earth theory, the inner earth theory. I have a lot of research I want to share, but it takes a lot of time to really put it together and to cite it. And put it all there in a way that's digestible. So it's an ongoing process, but I did want to share this introduction for you because it's a rabbit hole that you can end up spending a lot of time going down. Hopefully what I've been able to highlight for you here from my own extensive research into this mystery hopefully will help you have some context and a groundwork to work through for yourself. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.